The most wasted people in the world are not the ones who failed. They are not the people who tried everything they could and eventually ran out of chances. The most wasted people are the ones who were given more ability than most people will ever have, but slowly did nothing with it year after year, while everyone around them waited for the moment when they would finally use what they had. Almost everyone knows someone like this. The student who was always told they were capable of more. The child whose parents kept waiting for the day when everything would finally click. The friend who everyone knew was talented, but somehow kept ending up in the same place, no matter how many opportunities appeared. This person is not stupid. This person is not unlucky. In many cases, this person is one of the smartest people in the room. They understand things quickly. They learn faster than others. They have ideas and potential. But when the years pass and the results are measured, they are sometimes behind the people who had to struggle for every bit of progress they made. The word people usually use to describe this is lazy. But lazy is not the real answer. It is only a label people use when they stop looking deeper. The real question is this: why would someone with so much ability choose to do nothing with it? Most people assume being smart makes life easier, and in some ways it does. But for a certain type of smart person, intelligence can quietly become a trap that takes years to notice. When someone understands things easily from a young age, they often grow up in places where they are rarely challenged. School feels simple. Problems get solved quickly. They know the answer before others even understand the question. And because things come naturally, they never learn the importance of struggle. They never build the habit of trying again after failure. They never learn how to keep going when something feels difficult. Then one day, life gives them something that does not come easily. Something that requires patience, discipline, and effort. And for the first time, they experience confusion and failure. Instead of seeing that as a normal part of learning, their brain sees it as a threat. They start thinking something is wrong. They tell themselves they are not interested, it is not worth it, or they will come back later. But underneath those excuses is a deeper fear. What happens if they actually try and still are not good enough? Psychologist Carl Rogers spent much of his career studying why people who clearly have the ability to grow sometimes remain stuck. What he discovered was that the problem was often not their ability, but the way they viewed themselves. Rogers believed people naturally want to improve and become more, but that growth can become blocked when someone creates certain beliefs about their own value. For a smart person, those beliefs often form early. They become the person who always knows the answer, the person who learns quickly, the person who does not need much help. Over time, they begin connecting their worth to being naturally intelligent instead of being someone who works, learns, and improves. Their identity becomes built around being gifted, not around developing their gift. And that identity feels safe because they do not have to prove anything. But the moment life asks them to struggle, that safety disappears. Because struggling means becoming a beginner, making mistakes, and admitting they do not already know everything. This is where a fixed mindset begins to develop. A fixed mindset is the belief that your abilities are something you are born with and cannot really change. You either have talent or you do not. You are either smart or you are not. For someone who has always been seen as intelligent, this belief can feel comforting because it protects the identity they built. But the problem is that failure becomes much more painful. If ability is something fixed, then failing does not feel like a normal experience. It feels like proof that they were never as capable as people believed. So instead of taking risks and learning, they avoid situations where they might fail. They protect themselves by not trying fully. From the outside, it looks like laziness, but underneath, it is often fear. Fear that effort will reveal something they do not want to know. The label, lazy, can become one of the most damaging things someone carries because eventually they start believing it. Instead of asking why they struggle, they accept the idea that laziness is simply part of who they are. It becomes the explanation for every unfinished project, every missed opportunity, and every moment they did not follow through. They say things like, "That is just how I am." But the problem with this belief is that it removes the need to understand what is actually happening. If someone believes the problem is their personality, they stop looking for a solution. They no longer see themselves as someone facing a problem. They see themselves as the problem itself. What looks like laziness is often fear that has been hidden for so long that even the person does not recognize it anymore. It is the fear of giving everything they have and still failing. For someone who has always been considered talented, failure can feel like more than a bad result. It feels like losing the identity they built their entire life around. They fear being average. They fear discovering that they are not as special as people once believed. They fear being seen trying hard and still not succeeding. Because if they never fully try, they always have an excuse. They can tell themselves they could have done it if they wanted to. That belief protects them from failure, but it also prevents them from growing. Another reason smart people sometimes struggle is because they are not used to doing things that feel difficult or boring. Most people assume easy tasks are always motivating because they create quick success. But for someone who is used to constant challenge and stimulation, easy work can feel empty. Their brain starts searching for something more interesting, and they mistake boredom for a sign that something is not worth doing. They leave before the work becomes meaningful. They stop before the difficult but important part begins. The problem is not that they cannot work hard. The problem is that they never develop the ability to stay when something does not immediately feel rewarding. People who waste their potential often have a strong belief in a future version of themselves. They believe future them will finally become disciplined. Future them will start the project. Future them will become the person they know they can be. But that future version never actually arrives. They keep waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect motivation, or the perfect situation. Eventually, waiting starts feeling like preparation. Thinking about doing something starts feeling like progress. But nothing changes. They remain stuck between the person they imagine becoming and the person they continue being every day. The environment someone grows up in can also shape this pattern. When smart children are constantly praised for being smart, they can start believing their value comes from intelligence alone. They learn that being gifted is what makes them special, not effort, discipline, or improvement. So they focus on proving they are intelligent instead of building something with that intelligence. So they collect ideas, knowledge, and potential because those things feel safe. Potential cannot fail because it has never been tested. But the problem is that potential is not the final result. It is only the starting point. Some people develop this pattern because they grew up in situations where effort did not always lead to the outcome they expected. They tried before and felt disappointed. They worked hard and still did not get what they wanted. Over time, the brain starts learning that effort is risky because effort can lead to failure. So instead of trying and risking disappointment, they protect themselves by avoiding the situation completely. The problem is that the environment changes, but the belief stays. They continue living as if trying is dangerous, even when the opportunities in front of them are completely different. What makes this pattern so difficult to break is that eventually it changes the way people around the person see them. At first, everyone believes in them. They remind them of their ability. They encourage them to try. But after watching the same cycle happen again and again, people slowly start expecting less. They stop being surprised when opportunities are missed. They stop waiting for the big change that never comes. And those lowered expectations can make the person feel even more stuck, because it starts confirming the belief they already have about themselves. They begin living inside the version of themselves that everyone has learned to accept, even though that version is far below what they are actually capable of. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from knowing you are capable of more, but still not doing anything with it. It is not the exhaustion that comes from working too hard. It comes from carrying the weight of unfinished potential. It comes from constantly thinking about what you could have done, what you should have started, and who you could have become if you had acted sooner. The gap between the person they are and the person they believe they could be becomes something they carry every day. Even when they are doing nothing, Their mind is still fighting that invisible battle. And over time, that creates a tiredness that rest cannot fix. Comparison is another thing that keeps this cycle alive. Smart people who underperform often notice what others are doing because they are good at understanding patterns and recognizing ability. They see people who seem less naturally talented achieving things they never even attempted. Instead of motivating them, it can create a painful feeling of shame. Sometimes, that shame turns into judgment. They convince themselves those people are chasing the wrong things, or that their success is not as meaningful as it looks. But underneath that is a harder truth to accept. Those people took action. They tried, they failed, they improved. Talent can create potential, but action is what creates results. Many smart underperformers spend their lives feeling evaluated. Their parents see what they could become. Their teachers see what they could become. Even they themselves constantly compare who they are with who they believe they should be. Over time, this constant feeling of falling short creates a defensive reaction. They start avoiding situations where their ability might be judged. They do not apply. They do not submit. They do not finish. Not because they do not care, but because avoiding the attempt feels safer than facing the possibility of failure. Perfectionism is another thing that hides inside this pattern. But not all perfectionists are people who complete everything perfectly. Some perfectionists avoid finishing anything at all. They have a perfect version of the idea inside their head, and the real version can never compete with it. They imagine something amazing, but when it is time to actually create it, they see every flaw and every weakness. So they delay. They wait. They keep the dream untouched because the dream cannot fail if it stays inside their mind. The perfect version feels safer than the real version that can be judged. People caught in this cycle often describe themselves using the future tense. They say they are going to start. They are going to change. They are almost ready. They have a plan. They just need the right time. But this keeps their identity protected because they can continue believing they have potential without ever having to prove it. The longer they wait, the harder it becomes, because now they are not just starting a task. They are risking the entire story they have built about themselves. They are risking the possibility that they are not who they always believed they were. The people closest to someone like this often experience a strange mix of love and frustration. They can see the potential clearly. They know what this person could become. But they also see the same pattern repeating over and over again. They watch opportunities appear and disappear. They hear the same plans and promises without seeing much change. Eventually, they start protecting themselves from disappointment by expecting less. And slowly, the person who everyone believed could do something great becomes someone who keeps waiting for the right moment that never arrives. One of the biggest things keeping this pattern alive is the private story people tell themselves about why they are stuck. The reason is always something that sounds believable. The timing was wrong. The situation was not right. They were not ready yet. Someone else got in the way. And sometimes those things may actually be true. But when the same outcome keeps happening in different situations, the problem is usually deeper than the circumstances. The details change, but the pattern stays the same. And until someone stops protecting the story and starts looking at the pattern, nothing truly changes. This pattern becomes especially painful to see in someone who has carried it for many years. Not because older people cannot change, but because the distance between who they could have been and who they became has had more time to grow. They still talk about what they want to do. They still remember the potential people saw in them. They still describe their best version as something waiting in the future. And the people around them are left wondering whether to keep encouraging them or quietly accept that it may never happen. Because eventually, the question changes. It is no longer only why they never did it. It becomes what happens to a person who spends their entire life never discovering what they were truly capable of. The reason this pattern can survive for so long is because being smart can make it possible to function without fully committing. Their ability is real, so they can still succeed in certain situations. They can get by. They can avoid consequences big enough to force a change. And because life never completely falls apart, they never feel enough pressure to rebuild themselves. Their intelligence becomes both the thing that helps them survive and the thing that keeps them trapped. Because leaving the pattern would require choosing discomfort. And for someone who has always avoided struggle, discomfort feels like something to escape instead of something that helps them grow. What actually begins to change this pattern is usually not some huge life event, a perfect piece of advice, or a dramatic wake-up call. It happens when a person finally starts questioning the story they have been telling themselves for years. The excuses that once felt convincing begin to sound empty. They start noticing that the reasons they keep giving are not really moving them forward. It is a quiet and uncomfortable realization because there is no big moment where everything suddenly changes. It is just the feeling of recognizing that the story that protected them is also the thing keeping them stuck. And when that story starts costing more than it protects, that is when someone finally becomes open to doing something different. The shift from potential to action is usually much smaller than people imagine. Many people stay stuck because they believe starting has to look like a major transformation. They imagine a perfect beginning where they suddenly become disciplined, focused, and completely different. But that version of starting is so unrealistic that they never begin. They keep waiting for the right moment because anything smaller feels like it is not enough. But real change usually starts in ordinary ways. It starts with one small action, one attempt, one step forward. The problem is that the first step often feels too simple compared to the person they imagine becoming, so they ignore the exact thing that could have started the change. One of the clearest signs of this pattern appears when someone finally gets close to a real opportunity. Instead of feeling excited, they often feel a quiet sense of fear. Suddenly, they notice every possible problem. They see every reason why the timing is wrong, why it might fail, or why waiting would be smarter. And because they are intelligent, they can create very convincing explanations for why they should not move forward. The fear does not sound like fear. It sounds like logic. It sounds responsible. But sometimes it is just avoidance using better words. The closer they get to actually trying, the more reasons appear to delay. Carl Rogers often talked about the idea that people cannot move toward who they want to become while they are constantly focused on the distance between who they are and who they think they should be. And this is exactly what many smart underperformers spend their energy doing. They protect their image. They avoid situations where others might see their weaknesses. They keep the idea of their potential alive because it feels safer than testing it. But all that energy goes into protecting the possibility instead of creating real progress. They spend their effort maintaining the idea of who they could be instead of becoming that person. One of the most painful part is that many people are actually very self-aware. They know what they are doing. They understand why they avoid things. They can explain their own behavior better than anyone else. But understanding a problem does not automatically solve it. Knowing why you do something is different from being able to stop doing it. Sometimes, self-awareness even makes things harder because they cannot hide behind ignorance anymore. They know the pattern exists. They know what they are afraid of. And yet they still find themselves repeating the same actions. The way out is usually not finding the perfect motivation. Many people wait for the moment when they finally feel ready, inspired, or confident enough to begin. But motivation often comes after action, not before it. The brain starts creating motivation once it sees progress happening. But people stuck in this pattern do the opposite. They wait for the feeling first. They wait until they want it badly enough. They wait until everything feels right. And because they keep waiting, the feeling never comes. They are waiting for something that only appears after they take the first step. For this pattern to truly change, a person has to rebuild the way they see themselves. They have to let go of the identity of being someone with unlimited potential who simply has not used it yet. They have to accept that potential is not the same as achievement. Being capable of doing something and actually doing it are two different things. This is difficult because potential feels safe. It cannot fail. It cannot be judged. But real action can. Real effort can expose weaknesses. Real attempts can create failure. And choosing real effort over protected potential requires giving up the safety they have relied on for years. The people who create meaningful things in life are not always the people with the most natural talent. Many of them are simply the people who kept showing up. They worked before they felt completely ready. They accepted mistakes. They stayed committed even when progress was slow. The difference was not always that they had more ability. The difference was that they never believed ability alone was enough. They understood that talent is only the beginning. What matters is what someone does with it consistently. The most important thing about this entire pattern is that it is not permanent. It is not who someone truly is. It is not something they are born with and cannot change. It is a way of thinking and reacting that was learned over time. The ability was always there. The fear was also real. Both can exist together. But eventually, a person has to decide which one controls their future. Their past may explain why they became this way, but it does not have to decide what happens next. The question was never whether the ability existed, because it always did. The question was never whether the fear was real, because it always was. The real question is what someone chooses to do with the moment they have right now. Do they continue protecting the story they have repeated for years? Or do they take one small step toward becoming the person they always imagined? Potential was never the final destination. It was only the beginning. It was the door. And the only question left is whether they are finally willing to open it.